The first time I heard my own husband declare me dead, I was standing in the shadow of the church I grew up in. My back was pressed against the rough boards, Colt's shoulder solid against mine, the smell of dust and early morning coffee drifting through the open windows, while Silas Hart's voice floated out on a tide of sympathy. She was fragile, he was saying. You all know that. The pressure of the wedding, the strain of the ranch debts, it was too much for her gentle mind. Gentle mind. My fingers curled into fists. People murmured. Marla's calf apron rustled as she shifted on the front pew. I could picture exactly how she'd be sitting, arms crossed, eyes sharp. Cade would be in the back somewhere, hat low, watching everything. Hart's voice dipped lower, rich with rehearsed grief. The barn she'd been hiding in caught fire in the night, he said. We found the ruins at first light. There wasn't much left, but there was enough to know we should stop hoping. She'd ride back up that road. My stomach lurched. Beside me, Colt's hand brushed my arm, a gentle warning. Don't move, he breathed, barely a sound. Everything in me wanted to shove the church doors open, march down the aisle in my soot-stained clothes, and stand in front of Hart while the whole town stared. I wanted to say, I am not dead. I wanted to say, I am not fragile. I wanted to say, you didn't lose a wife, you lost a prisoner. But Colt's fingers closed around my wrist, grounding. Not yet, he murmured. Not like this. Inside, Hart kept weaving his story. I forgive her, he said softly, for running, for the fire, for the confusion her condition has caused. All I ask now is your prayers, for her soul, for mine, for this valley that's seen so much loss. A chair scraped. Someone sniffed. I pressed my forehead against the cool wood siding and closed my eyes. He was burying me with words. And the awful thing was, they were listening. When the service finally ended, the church doors opened, and people spilled onto the front steps in small clusters, their voices a low hum. Colt and I had circled behind the building before anyone came out. We watched from the fence line, half hidden by the old lilac bush that still clung to the corner. Hart stood on the top step, hat in hand, head bowed at just the right angle. People came up to him one by one. I'm so sorry, Silas. She was such a sweet girl. If there's anything we can do. He accepted every sympathy as if it were his due. Gentle nod, soft smile. A hand clasp just a moment longer than necessary. He's turning your death into a coat he can wear, I muttered. Look at him, draping it over his shoulders like it makes him noble. Colt's jaw tightened. Yeah, he said quietly. And if you rush out there right now, he'll turn your life into something he can twist too. See? My poor wife really is confused. She doesn't even know she should be dead. The ugly truth of it made my cheeks burn. I watched Cade step out of the building and pause on the porch. He didn't go straight to Hart. He looked over the crowd first, as if he could somehow see through walls and pick us out of the shadows. Then he walked up, slow, and shook Hart's hand. Rough morning, Cade said. Hart sighed heavily. I've known loss before, he said, but never like this. Cade's expression didn't give much away. I'll need a statement for the record, he said. About the fire. About when you last saw your wife. Hart nodded solemnly. Of course, he said. You'll have my full cooperation, Sheriff. I want everything done properly. For Rose's sake. My teeth set so hard that my jaw hurt. Colt must have felt it. Hey, he murmured. Look at me, not him. I dragged my eyes away from Hart and up to Colt's face. Steady, calm, concerned, but not panicked. We can't take his story away just by glaring at him from the bushes, Colt said. We have to give them another one, a truer one, and for that, we need Cade. How? I demanded. Hart owns half their ears. He doesn't own all of them, Colt said quietly. And he doesn't own the sheriff's ink. We start there. He squeezed my wrist once more, then let go. Come on, he said, back way. While the town's busy, feeling sorry for the wrong man. We moved like shadows, down the narrow path behind the church, past the little graveyard with its leaning stones, across the lane that ran behind Marla's calf and the general store. Through the open back door, I caught a glimpse of Marla wiping down a counter, jaw tight, eyes flicking toward the front where customers were surely already starting to drift in with their condolences. For a second, her gaze slid to the back window. Our eyes met, hers widened. Then, as if she'd only seen a stray cat, she turned away, picked up a coffee pot, and pulled the curtain half closed, leaving just enough of a gap for anyone in the alley to pass unseen. 3, Colt murmured. 3? I whispered. Marla. Cade, that woman gossiping in the cafe yesterday about Hart's land, he said. People who don't fit his version. We slipped around to the back of the sheriff's office. Cade's door was shut, but not locked. Colt tapped once in a quick, specific pattern, 2 light knocks, 1 heavier. The door opened a crack. Cade's face appeared, eyes sharp. Unless you're bringing me a live ghost, Mercer, this is bad, he started. Then he saw me. His words dropped. For a heartbeat, all 3 of us just stared at each other. Then Cade stepped back fast, waving us in. Get inside, he hissed. Both of you. Before someone decides to feel pious in the alley, we ducked through. He shut the door, clicked the lock, and pulled the thin curtain over the small window. The office smelled like paper, coffee, and dust. My heart pounded against my ribs. Cade looked me up and down, soot-smudged clothes, bandaged shoulder, borrowed hat. You're supposed to be dead, he said quietly. Tell that to my lungs, I said, breathless. They haven't gotten the message yet. Something almost like a smile flickered across his face, then vanished. This is trouble, he muttered. Big, stomping, heart-flavored trouble. Colt stepped between us, not as a barrier, but like a buffer. Trouble was already here, he said. We're just showing you its face. Cade scrubbed a hand over his jaw, then jerked his chin toward the small wooden chair in front of his desk. Sit, he told me. Careful with that shoulder. I obeyed. Colt stayed standing, leaning against the wall near the door, arms crossed loosely, casual. But I knew him well enough now to see the way every muscle was coiled and ready in case someone rattled the handle. On the desk, a neat stack of papers lay next to an open ledger. Cade tapped them. You know what this is? He asked. Hart's latest script? I guessed. Pretty much, Cade said. Officially, it's a request for a closure notice and an application for a commitment order that doesn't matter anymore now that he said you're dead. The room tilted a little. What? I asked. Commitment order, Cade repeated. He filed it with the circuit judge last week. Says you're prone to delusions, self-harm, and irrational flight. Says he was seeking legal permission to have you placed in professional care if you ran again. My stomach turned. He was going to have me locked away, I whispered. If the judge signed off, yeah, Cade said softly. Paper like this says your word doesn't count the same as his. Husband's testimony versus wife's condition and all that. Colt's hand closed into a fist against his bicep. And now, Colt asked, if Hart gets his closure and the judge thinks Rose is already dead, then the commitment petition dies with you. On paper, Cade said, but so does half your chance to fight back. Dead women don't give statements. They don't contest property claims or tell a judge their yes at the altar wasn't really a yes. I swallowed. Can you stop him? I asked. From telling that story? Cade sighed. Can I stop him from talking? He said. No man loves the sound of his own voice too much. But I can decide whose words go in my ledger, and what I send on to that judge when he passes through. He met my eyes. If you're willing to put your story on record, he said slowly, I'm willing to write it. My heart thudded. You mean, like a statement? I asked. Sworn, he said, as close to under oath as this town gets before a judge arrives. Your words, in your own mouth, about that wedding, about the debts, about what he said and did. I looked down at my hands. They were still smudged with soot from the barn, still trembling from the ridge. I've told bits, I said quietly, to Colt, to myself, in my head, but never, all the way through, on paper. You afraid of what it'll look like written down? Cade asked, not unkindly. I'm afraid of what it'll feel like, I admitted. He nodded. That's fair, he said. But understand this, Rose. Right now, the only marriage story on record is Hart's. Loving husband takes in fragile bride, tries to save failing ranch. Tragedy ensues. If you don't give me another version to write, that's the one that's gonna stand. Colt pushed off the wall and came to stand beside my chair. He didn't touch me at first, just stood close enough that I could feel his presence like a shield. You won't be alone while you say it, he murmured. I drew a breath, held it, let it out. Okay, I said. Right. If you've ever had to finally say out loud what you tried to survive quietly, you know how heavy those first words can feel. If you want to hear exactly how I tell the sheriff my wedding was a lie and what Hart has been putting on paper while I was running, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss this part. And tell me in the comments, have you ever realized the official story about you didn't match the truth and had to decide whether to correct it? Cade pulled a fresh page from a drawer, dipped his pen in ink, and bent over the desk. Full name, he said gently. I swallowed. Rose Whitaker Hart, I said. The last name tasted wrong. Heavy. Whitaker by birth, Hart by paper, he wrote, the scratch of the pen steady. Tell me about the engagement, he said. From the start, not his version, yours. So I did. I told him about the first letter with Hart's letterhead, about my father's cough and my mother's gratitude, about the favors that came with strings too fine to see until they tightened. I told him about the way Hart started using words like ours when he talked about the land, even before any ink dried. I told him about the day in the office when he took my hand. How old were you? Cade asked quietly. 23, I said. He was older, my father's age. And what did he say? Cade pressed. That if I married him, I said, voice thin, the notes would be forgiven. Daddy would never have to see another debt letter again. That he'd take care of us. Did he say what would happen if you said no? Cade asked. He didn't have to, I whispered. I could see it. In the way he looked at the ledger, in the way Daddy looked at him. Cade's jaw flexed. So when you said yes, he said, was that because you wanted to marry him? Or because you believed it was the only way to keep your family afloat? Tears pricked my eyes. The only way, I said. It didn't feel like a choice. It felt like a trade. Me for the ranch. His pen moved. Did you ever tell him you loved him? Cade asked. No, I said. I told him I'd do my duty. He said that was good enough. The words felt slimy in my mouth even now. Colt's hand brushed my shoulder lightly, then dropped. Just a reminder that he was there. Tell me about the days before the wedding, Cade prompted. So I did. I told him about the corset, the whispers, the weight of expectation, the hardness in Hart's grip, the way he started calling me girl instead of Rose when we were alone. I told him about the office wall. Did he strike you? Cade asked. No, I said. He crowded me, pinned me, told me I was lucky he was willing to marry damaged goods, asked if I understood what he'd bought. Colt's breath hissed in between his teeth. Cade's pen paused, then resumed. And on the wedding day? He asked. Did you walk down that aisle freely? My throat closed. I walked because everyone was watching, I whispered. Because Mama was crying and Daddy was smiling for the first time in months. Because Hart's men were standing near the doors. Did you feel you could change your mind? Cade pressed gently. No, I said. I felt trapped. And when you ran? He asked softly. What pushed you? I closed my eyes. I heard him talking, I said, to one of his men, in the hallway outside the back room. He thought I was still in the dressing room. What did he say? Cade asked. He said, once the ink dries, she can cry all she wants. She's still mine, I whispered. Said, every man pays for land one way or another. I'm just getting the better end of the deal. My stomach churned. He laughed. I added, and I realized, if I let that ink dry, I was handing him the rope he'd use to tie me up for the rest of my life. Silence settled over the room. Even Colt's breathing sounded loud. And so you ran, Cade said. Yes, I whispered. Out the back through the trees, onto the first horse I could catch. I ran to save my life, not to hurt his. Cade finished the line he'd been writing, then set the pen down for a moment and flexed his fingers. He looked older all of a sudden. Rose, he said quietly, I need to ask this next part, and I hate that I do. But if I don't, someone else will, and I'd rather it be me. Ask, I said. Did he ever strike you? He asked again, more pointed. Ever raise a hand? Threaten to? Not with a fist, I said. With words, with debt, with the law, with that paper. He nodded slowly. Sometimes that's worse, he said. You can show a bruise. It's harder to show. This? He tapped the commitment petition. But we'll try, he added. Cade set my statement aside to dry and picked up the small pile of things Colt had laid on his desk earlier. Luke's buckle, the rusted chain, the scrap of a map with the creek bend marked where fences don't match. He turned the buckle over in his hand, thumb tracing the LM and the scratch circle and slash. Luke's? He asked. Yes, Colt said quietly. He wore it the day he rode out to fix Whitaker's fence. Hart told me there was nothing left but his hat. And this? Cade asked, lifting the chain. Pulled that from the creek bank downstream of the bend, Colt said. Right where the undercut is deepest. Some bone beside it. Could be an animal, could be not. But it's not an accident when you find a chain sunk in the mud where a man slipped. Cade studied the metal, then set it down as if it might burn him. And you're sure about the fence lines? He asked. I helped set the old ones, Colt said. Hearts are a few feet in. Enough to change whose land the water's technically on. Enough to move where a man dies on paper. Cade swore softly under his breath. Do you know how this looks? He asked. Like a pattern, Colt replied. Hanson's, Mercer. That foreman you mentioned yesterday. Boys are disappearing near the land Hart wants. Wives are being called fragile when they run. Barns burning when they remember too much. Like intent, I added quietly. Cade rubbed his temples. It looks like a storm I should have seen building sooner, he said. Before any of us could say another word, someone banged on the front door. 3 hard knocks. We all froze. Cade's eyes flicked to the window, then to us. Back, he hissed. Both of you. Behind those record shelves. Now. Colt moved instantly. He grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the tall wooden filing shelves that lined the side wall. There was just enough space between them and the back wall to squeeze in. He put me in the narrow gap first, then stepped in front of me, his body a solid shield in case anyone pushed past. Cade. I could hear his heart beating where my forehead brushed against his shoulder blades. The knock came again. Sharper. Sheriff. A voice called. You in there? Hart's man. I recognized the drawl. Cade took a breath. The sheriff's calm voice slid back into place like a mask. Doors open, he called. Just sticky. The latch clicked. Boot steps crossed the floor. From our hiding place, I could only see a sliver of the room through the gap between 2 shelves, the edge of Cade's desk, part of his shoulder, and the hat brims of 2 men. Morning, Cade said. Thought you'd be at the caf, telling folks how much you admire Hart's grieving stance. Boss sent us, one of the men said. Wants an update. He's planning a gathering to say a few words about his wife. She's barely cold, and he's planning speeches, Cade said dryly. Heart of gold, that man. Don't get cute, the other man snapped. He wants to close the cirque officially. Says you can't keep wasting resources looking for a woman who burned herself up. My fingernails dug into my palms. Colt's hand reached back, finding mine in the darkness. He squeezed steady. Search hasn't been active since sunrise, Cade said. Fire took care of that. I was just writing it up. My statement lay on his desk. My heart seized, but Cade's hand slid casually over the top sheet, flipping another page over it like he'd done it 100 times. You get anything else from the barn? One man asked. Any remains? Char and ash, Cade said. Old wood, some metal. Nothing I'd put a name to without guessing, and I don't put guesses in my ledger. You could have just said no, the first man muttered. I could have, Cade said, but where's the fun in that? They shifted. Boss also wants to know if you've seen Mercer around, the second man added. Says he was sniffing near the creek yesterday. If Mercer wants to look at water and remember his brother, that's his business, Cade said. Until he breaks a law, I don't answer for where he stands. Boss says he's agitating. The man went on, talking in ways that stir people up. Might be best for everyone if he rides on. My stomach clenched. They weren't just trying to bury me. They were aiming to push Colt out too. Boss is free to suggest that to him in person, Cade said flatly. Until then, Mercer's got as much right to stand on dirt as any other man in this valley. Silence stretched. Finally, one of the men exhaled. Boss is planning to speak at Marla's later, he said. Make it public. Might want to. Line your story up with his. I line my story up with the facts, Cade said. But I'll be there. Boot steps again. The door opened, closed. The office settled back into quiet. I realized I'd been holding my breath the whole time. Colt's fingers threaded through mine more firmly. You okay? He murmured. I think my heart just ran a race without me, I whispered. A moment later, Cade's face appeared around the side of the shelves. Coast is clear, he said softly. For the next 5 minutes anyway. We stepped out. He looked tired. What did he mean? I asked. About lining your story up with Hart's. Cade's mouth twisted. Boss doesn't mind a sheriff, he said. As long as the badge backs his version. Men like him love the law when it bends their way. And you? Colt asked. I sleep at night when my ledger matches what I saw, Cade said. Not what someone with money tells me to see. He sank into his chair. When Luke went missing, he said slowly, Hart came in here with tears in his eyes and a story on his tongue. Said your brother slipped. Said the creek took him. Said you were too upset to give a clear account, Mercer. Colt's jaw clenched. And you believed him, Colt said. I believed I didn't have enough to say otherwise, Cade corrected. Nobody, no witness except his men. A valley that wanted to think it was an accident because the alternative meant someone was using the land like a graveyard. He looked at me. When Hart started hinting that you were fragile, he went on, I told him I wouldn't sign any paper that said you weren't fit to speak for yourself unless I saw it with my own eyes. He stopped asking me, went straight to the judge instead. He tapped my statement. I can't change what I didn't do back then, he said, but I can decide what I do now. He slid my pages closer. Read this, he said. Make sure it's your words, not mine. My eyes moved down the lines. I, Rose Whitaker Hart, declare. My agreement to marry Silas Hart was given under financial duress. I believed my family's home depended on my compliance. I did not feel free to say no. On the day of the wedding, new information about his intentions led me to fear for my safety and freedom. By the time I reached the bottom, my eyes were swimming. It's true, I said hoarsely. All of it. Then sign, Cade said, pushing the pen toward me. Right there. Full name. My hand shook as I took it. For a second, the ink line wobbled, but I steadied. Rose Whitaker Hart. The name didn't feel like surrender this time. It felt like evidence. Cade sanded the signature, blew lightly, then nodded. I'll send a copy with the circuit judge when he passes through, he said, and I'll keep the original in my safe. He stood, crossed to a heavy iron box in the corner, and unlocked it. Inside, I saw a few other things, an old rifle, a wrapped bundle, a worn envelope with a name I didn't catch. He laid my statement inside, then Luke's buckle, then a folded note with Hart's petition. The day I hand this over, he said quietly, is the day Hart stops being the only man in the room with paper on his side. He shut the safe, turned the key. Until then, he added, we play smart. We didn't get time to feel the weight of what we'd just done. The church bell rang once outside of Marla's signal for the lunchtime rush. Through the thin walls, I heard the town waking up differently, chairs scraping, wagons rolling, voices rising. Cade glanced toward the front window, then back at us. Hart's going to hold court at the calf, he said. Tell his story over coffee and pie. Folks will carry it home in their pockets. Let him talk, Colt said. We'll have our turn. Cade looked at me. If you want that turn, he said slowly, you're going to have to let people see you. Not as the ghost he just buried, as the woman who lived through him. The thought made my pulse trip. Not yet, I said. Not while he can still twist it in the moment. I want something solid under my feet first. You just put something solid in my safe, Cade said. Next step is deciding when to stand on it. We didn't get to answer. Boots hit the front steps, heavier, slower, more deliberate. A voice followed, smooth, familiar, too close. Sheriff? Hart called through the door. Silas Hart. Mind if I come in? We've got a few loose ends to tie off. My blood ran cold. Colt's hand found the small of my back, guiding me without a word. Cade's eyes met mine. For the first time since we stepped into his office, he looked scared, not for himself, for us. Back, he whispered, both of you, behind that door, and whatever I say, don't make a sound. Colt moved us quickly into the narrow space behind the inner door that led to the tiny holding cell, just enough room to squeeze in, the door almost flush with the wall when closed. We pressed close, my injured shoulder cushioned by Colt's chest, his arms braced on either side of me to keep us from bumping anything that might rattle. The sheriff's office door opened. Mr. Hart, Cade said, voice smooth as always. Busy morning for a grieving man, isn't it? Hart chuckled softly. Grief makes a man efficient, he said. You and I, Sheriff, we're going to make sure this valley understands exactly what happened to my poor wife. In the dark sliver of space where I stood, hidden, I realized something with a sharp, almost electric clarity. Silas Hart thought he was standing over my grave, but my name was locked in Cade's safe now. My story on paper. My heart is beating against Colt's steady chest. And the next time I stepped into the light, it wouldn't be as the fragile bride he forgave. It would be like the woman who called the marriage a lie. When I tore that veil and rode into the canyon, I thought running was the only way to stay alive. Today, I sat in the sheriff's office and watched my name go into a safe, not as somebody fragile wife, but as the woman who finally said, out loud, what that wedding really was. Now my husband is standing on the other side of a thin wall, talking about closure, while I stand behind a door with the man who pulled me out of the fire and a sheriff who finally decided his ledger should match the ground instead of the gossip. If you want to hear what happens when Hart starts tightening his story in that office, and how we finally make a pact to fight back instead of just running. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next episode. And tell me in the comments, if you were in my boots, would you walk back into town and show them you're alive right now? Or wait until the truth is too heavy for Hart to carry on his own?